Badger, don't! Badger?
13th of September 2014 saw the release of Bodger and Badger the movie, an amateur film made by young animator George Brind. The project was completed using limited tools in Microsoft PowerPoint, no advanced computer-generated graphics, no animation software, but lots of enthusiasm.
The idea of actually doing a movie in this kind of animation, I remember thinking at the time that I don't think anybody ever did this before.
Mashed potato!
But when did Bodger and Badger first appear on our screens, and how did they end up in the hands of George?
50.
Bodger and Badger had first appeared in their own television series which began in September 1989 and ended in March 1999. Following that, they appeared in live events at universities across the country. George Brind was interested in the show as a small child, and the show went on to be one of his favourite programmes of all time.
Bodger and Badger is a TV show that I think certain people would remember.
No, Badger, no, Badger, stop it! Badger, don't do that! Badger, don't do that! Badger, don't do that! Oh, Badger!
It was a show about an odd job man named Simon Bodger who had a pet talking badger, and they went on millions of adventures. Whatever the trouble was, it always had something to do with mashed potato and Simon or anybody else in the situation getting covered in it.
Hey, Badge, I made Which one of you two did that? I did. Very funny. I reckon you're both as bad as each other.
I think I was probably a fan of it. I watched the show as a child. I think my parents first introduced it to me at a young age as a children's program, and I watched it, and I imagine I thought it was funny. I don't really remember very much of that time of my life anymore, but it's something that's still around in today's life, so that obviously means it's stood the test of time.
Were we a fan of it?
Well, we didn't know much about it until our children started watching it. We had 3 boys, and they were all vaguely interested, but the most interested son was George.
I think he enjoyed the slapstick. It was very visual, and George was very much into shows that were visual.
And he very much liked the mashed potato.
He did like the mashed potato.
Being flung around.
I have to say, I often felt a bit sorry for Bodger getting covered in mashed potato all the time.
Here it is. Oh, and I also polished the floor, so careful you don't slip on it.
Thanks, Badger. Thanks very, very much indeed.
I think you've got to realise that it's slapstick comedy, and I mean, if you treat it with a certain amount of realism, then you start to see dark kind of undertones for production. I mean, Badger is constantly kind of bullying Bodger, so if you took that as face value, then it would probably become quite a dark and sinister show. So I think you've got to take it with a pinch of salt.
The episode that I remember being my favourite, well, there are several. One of them was Peace and Quiet, which a guest called Miss Prunella Peak comes to stay at Seagull's Rest.
And get plenty of peace and quiet.
Sorry.
Twit.
And there's a little bit of chocolate mashed potato.
Oh, what's this? Oh, mashed potato again? Oh, that's done it. Oh.
It ends in a pillow fight.
I told you I'd be sleeping in room number 3 tonight.
Did you? I don't remember.
Oh, well, perhaps this might refresh your memory.
What? Oh, Miss Pick, no, Miss Pick, stop! Miss
Have
Pick,
you
stop!
got a memory, that is?
Listen,
I told you.
You've broken the pillow.
And categorically that I'd be sleeping in room number 3.
And the other one I remember is the extraterrestrial toothbrush, in which Miss Peak, frustrated by the night with the mashed potato and all the pillow fighting, decides to leave Seagull's Rest, and Simon tries to cheer him up with trifle, However, as she's trying the trifle, we get a lot of business about the electric toothbrush, and it's inside the trifle that it makes Miss Peak and Bodger as well believe that this could be, for the first time in history, something to do with an extraterrestrial attack.
There's a trifle next door, and I think it might have been taken over by an alien force.
Alien force?
And I'm not pulling your leg off, sir. There's something inside that trifle, and well, we don't know what it is.
An electric toothbrush?
An electric toothbrush? An electric toothbrush?
Yeah.
Not her electric. Sorry, officer, the aliens have all gone home. Bye. Oh, Badger.
I was a fan of Bodger and Badger. It was one of my favourite programmes of all time, and it still is to this day. I would hate to see it forgotten.
With George Brind being a Bodger and Badger fanatic, in 2011 he decided to make his own series of one-off animated specials.
The idea of actually doing Bodger and Badger specials, I mean, I wanted to see what it would be like if I made some specials. So I thought of the idea for the specials in November of 2011, almost on the spot. And the special that I did first of all was Pudsey Mash, which was related to children in need. And it took me all the days in November up till the 20th of November to do. I did want to have it done on the 18th of November, which would be children in need, but, you know, I delayed it. And my family did get involved. I mean, my family are people who would love to help me.
I think I got involved a little bit with them. I tried to help him kind of craft the stories so that they would be interesting for viewers. George has a tendency to write overly long kind of expositional dialogue where, you know, it doesn't really keep the interest of the audience. The kind of episode stagnates when he usually gets to this part. So, you know, I tried to help him overcome those challenges that he had with writing.
We always try and support George in whatever projects he has going, and we're there to have him bounce ideas off us, and possibly give advice about how some kind of effect might be created or a storyline. But mostly George did it completely by himself.
But I remember at the time his brother Thomas was doing things with PowerPoint, producing animations. I think he got several of the ideas from looking at what Thomas was doing.
What I thought was that it was going to be an awful lot of effort for George. And something about George is that he insists, or at the time he insisted, on using outdated and, you know, I mean, no offence to George or anything, but, you know, just rubbish animation technique using, you know, successive still images from Microsoft PowerPoint. So, you know, there was no illusion of animation. So, you know, in that regard, I thought the idea, well, it sounded like a lot of work, but, you know, I was keen to support George's creative ideas.
In January 2012, as the making of the animated specials got underway, George Brind had a brainwave to make a feature film of Bodger and Badger, which he imagined to be the final chapter in the Bodger and Badger franchise.
The idea of doing a movie came about in January of 2012, shortly after I did my second special, We Wish You a Mashy Christmas. Basically it came about because with the animation I was using, I wanted to know what it would be like if I actually made a proper feature-length movie. Now I did use this before in a kind of like a re-edit of a 2000 film called Thomas and the Magic Railroad, which I don't particularly like, looking back on it now. So basically the film was the same, but it would be the extra scenes that had the animation I was using. And so to actually make a movie that used it completely would be something that nobody had ever done before. Compared to something like Wallace and Gromit, which is absolutely superb animation, incredibly well done, plasticine animated movies. And compared to brilliantly computer-generated films like Toy Story, I don't think anybody would even think of doing it because of how terrible people might consider it.
If I said that the specials were sounded like a lot of work, then a movie sounds like an awful lot of work. I mean, the specials themselves are about 10 minutes probably max, but a film full on 2 hours. It's a lot of work. So I was apprehensive, to say the least.
Well, I was worried that he was trying to do it with PowerPoint. I was a little bit embarrassed that we hadn't got him some better software.
Yeah, I mean, I thought it was going to be an absolutely huge undertaking, and was it really possible and feasible to do a whole feature-length movie, sort of more than an hour long, in PowerPoint? But yeah, George is very persistent, and he did a really good job, and I think it turned out quite well. I mean, obviously, if he'd had a better software than PowerPoint to use, he would have got been able to have some different effects than he did. But bearing in mind what he was using, I think he did a pretty good job.
To upgrade Bodger and Badger to a feature-length film, George had to expand the original plot of the TV series to one of epic proportions. While still keeping the classic moments of slapstick comedy that define the show, he also expanded the plot into both darker and more romantic directions. However, within the production team, there were various arguments about how this would be best achieved.
As I said before, with regards to whether or not I felt sorry for Bodger, I mean, if you start taking the show too seriously, if you start viewing it outside of its children's programme setting, then, some of the themes in it become a little bit disturbing, and I felt that George was kind of taking that to an extreme, where he started making out Mrs. Jabel to be some kind of demon woman who was, on the hunt for blood and murder. So, I tried to steer him away from that direction. How much that paid off, though, I don't really know.
Why are you still protecting him? He's landed you in jail.
No, actually. I think it was you. Cool. Was that all?
Yes.
Good. I'll see you in court.
There's something interesting about the Bodger and Badger characters. That every time they get covered in mashed potato, it's always the same old, "Oh, Mr. Bodger, you stupid fool! You did all these things. Throw mashed potato at me. Throw other messy substance," which was really Badger's fault. But of course, Badger isn't allowed to be shown to the general public, and so the blame would always be at Bodger. In particular, Mrs. Drabel, there's something about her that, and I think you get that with other Bodger and Badger characters, that, she's someone who said, "I'll get you for this," and whatever.
Well, I mean, obviously Bodger and Badger is a children's programme, and generally speaking, it wasn't very dark. So this was a new direction for it. I know that George's brother Thomas was a little bit concerned about the idea of it being dark, but I think in fact it was less dark in the end than George had originally had the idea that he might do it. I think initially they were going to be quite, it was going to be quite a lot darker.
Well, I was a bit worried really, because essentially Bodger and Badger is slapstick and not dark at all. So it was a departure.
I did try and think of reasons as to why she was a psychopath. I didn't call her a psychopath, I just called her a killer. That I tried to think of reasons that maybe she killed people who worked for her but were so useless that she just decided to eliminate every single one of them. And Bodger was on the list. This is kind of based on Wallace and Gromit and Matter of Life and Death. But even then, that idea didn't really work. And so, before production had even started, the idea was completely out the window. And so, I reluctantly agreed with Thomas's better plot.
With the plot details settled, Thomas Brind began to write the first draft of the script. George was initially very pleased with the progress made.
I think Thomas is a very kind brother. We get on well with each other. He is always insistent on making sure my writing or stories that I make sense. He's pretty picky in terms of grammatical errors that I would sometimes make. But sometimes when I look at something he writes for me, I think I'm just as picky. But I think we get on really well with each other. Really, really well.
Oh, George's brother Thomas is very kind to George. He's always very supportive of his projects and tries to help and assist him in making them a success.
Yeah, he is very supportive.
In September 2012, Thomas Brind left for university, leaving the production team without a lead writer. George's plans for the film were delayed. Despite Thomas Brind's draft of the script being incomplete, George Brind decided to start production with what was written so far. George ended up carrying on writing the script from Thomas's unfinished draft. In fact, sometimes making up as he went along, in particular during the climactic fight scene.
Now, Mousy, go! No, I won't, you stupid chicken! Look, I'll fight you, and I'll fight you back!
Well, Thomas is someone who doesn't really... I mean, he gets so tied up with more important work to do, like university work and probably real work or other things like that, that sometimes he wouldn't be able to do the things for me and finish them off at the time I would want him to. And so it became clear when I was doing production that he wouldn't be able to finish it because of how busy he was. And so, yeah, I did think that starting production without letting him finish his draft of the script was the right thing to do. Because, you know, I would have been here for years, maybe even months on doing it.
I think you can, when you watch the production, you'll see it's around about the halfway point where George took over writing and I stopped writing, and you probably see a very noticeable change in style in terms of the length of dialogue, how everything is explained in intricate detail, and some of the scenes in the second half are overly long.
You must be Simon Bodger, the owner of this badger who's about to be ludicrously killed by my brother here. His name is Brind, and I'm his brother Artemis, and I am a collector of talking badgers. I have been since the last 30 years.
That being said, I mean, I don't want to trounce on George's efforts. I think he did a very good job with the second half of the film, and I think, he brought all the loose strands together that were, started in the first half. So, I think in hindsight, yeah, I would do the same thing again. I mean, I have other commitments, and George was available to, or had the time to write the script, so, he did.
Well, I have to say that the script, you can tell really in the script where Thomas finished and George started, because George does have a tendency to write in quite a lot of detail and to make things quite long-winded. For example,
you're thinking of the wedding scene.
I am thinking of the wedding
scene. Yeah,
scene.
that was a classic Georgeism.
Simon, repeat after me. I, Simon Bodger, take thee, Millie Taylor, to be my wedded wife. I, Simon Bodger, take thee, Millie Taylor, to be my wedded wife.
So, you might have thought that just I now pronounce you man and wife would have been enough, but George wanted to have the whole ceremony in, and I think that scene was a bit overlong, and if Tom had been writing it, I'm sure it would have been briefer than it was.
The epic production began in January 2013 and ended in April 2014, with George continuing to make more specials simultaneously with production up until shortly before the movie's release. while George Brind cast himself as the majority of the characters, including Bodger, Badger, Mousie, China, Millie, Mrs. Drabel, Mrs. Melly, Mr. Brian Death, and Mr. Artemis Death. He cast his father, Richard, as the narrator, and he also cast his mother, Fiona, as a newsreader who appears very briefly in the film.
I would say that of the cast list, there is one person who probably does the voices for over 90% of the cast, and that is George Brind himself. So you would be tempted to say that this is kind of a vanity project, you know, George is trying to celebrate his own voice. But I think what you need to bear in mind is that when he came to do the voices, he really had a very limited number of voice actors who were willing to participate in his project. So, you know, George did these voices out of necessity as opposed to out of doing it as for vanity.
I can do impressions of different characters from different things. I mean, let's face it, sometimes in life you could never do a good Badger accent as that. I mean, could you hand me over some mashed potato, for instance? So yeah, I think I'm a good impersonator of Badger. And I cast myself as the majority of almost all of the characters. I haven't really had other people do the voices. I think only my brother did a few of the voices in a couple of the specials, like Mr. Graham, both in Mash the Halls and An Easter Sleepwalk.
Ah, Mr. Bodger, so you've come to paint my daughter's bedroom. Oi! Cut that racket out! I'm trying to get some sleep! It's just gone past 3 o'clock in the morning!
But overall, I think I haven't had any other actors who have taken part in the specials, the voices of them, apart from me. I cast my father as the narrator because I wondered whether it would be a good voice, and I think he does a good job.
And it gets Bodger into a lot of trouble. 6 jobs worth of trouble, to be precise. You remember that reprise clip at the beginning of the film? You know? No, I don't want to see it again. Anyway, let's get on with the show. Well, I didn't have a very visible part, so I don't think people would necessarily recognise me.
You're referring to your acting as the narrator, of course, which you were asked to do, weren't you? And, you know, you made a good job of it.
I think some parts of my father's performance, i.e. the narrator, were a bit wooden. I think that is his classic kind of acting style, where he reverts to a monotone voice.
I cast my mother as a news reporter, just to make sure that I wasn't the only one who was doing the voices, so that's why I cast who I cast.
Well-known odd-job man Simon Bodger has today shocked residents with reports of him entering the local tourist information office.
I think Mum's mother, as in Fiona's, my part in it, I don't even particularly remember what her role was, so I think she played a very minor role. I mean, I don't think that's because George didn't want to give her a major role, it was because she didn't particularly want a major role, and that's why kind of her part was quite small.
George planned the release for the 13th of September 2014, the 25th anniversary of the original television series. To commemorate this occasion, George wanted to re-explore the origins of the show, including the backstory of its most important character, Badger. For this, George wanted to show what happened to his parents, how he came to be owned by Simon, and more importantly, how he gained his interest in mashed potato.
I tried to establish that Badger was part of a rare species of talking badgers. And I think the idea of Badger having some parents, but then in this movie that they were fake, it's obviously a little homage to the 1999 film Stuart Little with Michael J. Fox and Hugh Ray and Gina Davis and Jonathan McNichie. The mouse couple are ordered by the baddies to kidnap Stuart. And basically in this movie, practically the same thing is happening. That with the help of Artemis Death, who's a badger collector, he is requested by the villains to capture Badger without them realising this by taking 2 badgers and having the badgers impersonate as Badger's parents. And then we find out that his real parents were killed trying to cross the road, and Badger was the only survivor. A bit like Stuart's parents, who I can't remember how they died in Stuart Little, but, well, you know, it's that kind of thing.
They were essentially a carbon copy of Stuart Little. So in Stuart Little, you know, exactly the same storyline comes along where 2 mice come along and they tell him that they are his parents and that they want him to go away with him, and they actually turn out to be villains just masquerading as his parents. And you know, this idea was completely and utterly just lifted from Stuart Little and plonked in Bodger and Badger the movie. And so kind of in that sense, I feel like he could have done kind of the idea more justice, because what he essentially did is he put an idea from a different film in this film, whereas I'm a very keen advocate that you try and include as much original material in your films and productions as possible. So I think he could have done probably a bit more work to kind of, you know, integrate it into the story, because at the current time I did feel that it was more kind of a tacked on subplot than, you know, a major subplot.
Yes, I thought they were. They were quite good, really.
Yes, I thought they worked as well, although it has been pointed out to me that it was following quite similar to an idea that had been used in the story of Stuart Little. But, you know, I thought it was fine.
After the film's initial completion, George reviewed the storylines of each of the characters with his brother. Thomas thought that the characters of Bruno and Janet Park should have an alternate happy ending to being left in prison with the villains. An epilogue was added to show them escaping from prison and heading for a new life in America, hopefully leaving the audience with a feel-good vibe.
I promise you we won't get lost. Onwards! Miami, here we come!
The film was finally completed and released on YouTube on the 13th of September 2014. Initially it gained hundreds of views early on, however this had risen to over 1,000 by January 2015 and continues to increase. It was received positively by critics. Comments of support were also left, such as one by George's friend Adam Knight, that's me by the way, saying fantastic as always. And later another comment was left saying good work. On the same day as its release, George Brind held a private premiere of the film at the Dorchester Youth and Community Centre for family and friends.
The premiere, unfortunately, I was unable to attend because I went to Malaysia in the summer at the time that George had scheduled the premiere, so I was unable to attend, but I was told by those people who had attended that it was, you know, a great success, and I think more important to me than the kind of screening of the project was George, you know, getting back in touch with all of his old friends and kind of interacting with them. I think that was, you know, the major positive that came out of the premiere.
I would say it went well, yeah. I had my family went, my family's friends went, my preschool teacher went, my uncle went. My grandparents went. It was a fantastic time. We had a wonderful food party with all that kind of thing. It was a fantastic event, and pretty much everybody enjoyed it. It was good. It was good, really good.
I thought the premiere went really well. It was a very enjoyable evening with lots of family and friends there. All of those who came were really positive about what George had produced, and yes, it was a very enjoyable evening.
And George gave a very good introduction, didn't he?
He did, and he and his friend Thomas did a little bit of a a sketch for us in the interval as well.
Albatross! What flavour is it? It's a bird, isn't it? It's a seabird. There ain't any flavour. Albatross!
Yeah, no, altogether a very good evening.
Whilst the film was enjoyed by all, both on YouTube and at the premiere, how did George Brind and his family look back on the film now?
Overall, I'm proud of Bodger and Badger the movie. I think it's probably one of the best movies I've made at the moment. I think it's good.
I feel like it was a successful project for George. I think something that George struggles with in terms of filmmaking is kind of really seeing a project through to the end. You know, he kind of starts lots of projects, he has lots of ideas, but rarely he has the conviction to finish them. So I think this was one of his first major projects that he really kind of, you know, followed through on. So in that way, it was a success. There are obviously parts of the movie that could be better. You know, there are some moments in the second half of the film that are just overly long. I think the fight scene is kind of the most blatant example of that. I think it kind of, it almost kind of goes into the realm of being tedious and meticulously boring. But, you know, overall, I think it was a success.
The things that I think probably could have been made better about it, I mean, take, for example, the chase scene at the beginning. When Simon attempts to try and escape from them by climbing up onto a delivery truck on a hard shoulder of a motorway. Originally, the plan was to have that happen on the road as opposed to that, but I got the wrong end of the stick with the animation. So then I carried on writing. Even my brother says that that was something that was bad.
The lorry that they climb it onto during the chase scene was supposed to be moving, but George, when he read the script, he didn't understand, and so he animated it with just having the kind of the lorry stationary, which obviously wasn't as intended, and thus the scene didn't really make sense. But you know, he didn't want to reanimate it, and that was that.
Obviously there was the software that was used, which is not really intended for producing animation, certainly not feature-length films. And we do now have a new software, various Autodesk products, and I know George is actually currently learning how to use Autodesk Maya, so hopefully in due course the animations will look quite a lot more professional.
Yeah, I mean, you can say you might do it differently, but for the age that George was and the state of his getting to know how to make a film, it was actually very good. And everybody at the premiere thought he'd done a really good job.
My brother also thought that even though I didn't go with the idea of Mrs. Jabel being a psychopath, they were behaving like they were psychopaths, you know, wanting to actually kill Badger, you know, get the rings out, stab.
You listen, Mr. Jabal. You're not going to make his death worse just by cutting him open.
Really? Just watch us. Okay, Mr. Death, stab him.
Yes, Mrs. Jabal.
Yeah. I think myself that he's probably wrong. I mean, if he's right, I mean, I did try my best, but other than all that, I think I did a good job in Bodger and Badger. I'm proud of it.
Whilst the film continues to be generally enjoyed by people, it isn't exactly a Hollywood blockbuster. What changes would George Brind and his family expect to see should Bodger and Badger the movie ever become a reality?
I think the story would be alright to use for an officially made movie. But in terms of the animation, I don't think it would work. Because, I mean, in this animation there's hardly any walking, there's hardly any talking in terms of the mouth actually moving up and down, hardly any lip sync like the Thunderbird puppets.
Thunderbirds are go.
I mean, if people were sitting in that cinema and actually seeing this animation, they'd be thinking, oh my goodness me, what is this rubbish? I can't be bothered to sit here waiting for all this kind of thing. But I mean, I think in terms of the story, it would work as a feature film, but in terms of the animation, it wouldn't. I mean, if you wanted it to work, you'd have to get the film rights from the company who owns Bodger and Badger now, whether it's the BBC or Andy Cunningham himself, and you know, get him back if you wanted to, get the other actors back if you wanted to, make the movie, and well, it may be a tremendous success, it may not be.
I don't think it would really work at the cinema, due to things like the fact that the animation, using PowerPoint, it didn't really give that kind of professional finish that you would be looking for at a cinema. But you know, for enjoying on YouTube, yeah, really great. And as a stepping stone for George to develop his techniques in animation, yeah, excellent.
With Bodger and Badger the movie as the final chapter in the franchise, what will George Brind do next in terms of filmmaking?
I am the type of boy who would think of one idea after another. I have so many projects in production at the moment. When I first thought of doing Bodger and Badger the movie, I imagined it to be the final chapter. I think just before the release, my attitude towards that started to change. So it's probably not the end of me doing stuff to do with Bodger and Badger, and it's certainly not the end of me doing projects in general. The more recent thing I've done in terms of Bodger and Badger is another animated episode, but this time not in PowerPoint, in a different type of plasticine animation, but not as sophisticated as Aardman animations or other things.
Hello, Simon.
But the plans for the future are, I have the plan to do a film that's based on an old PC game called Hype the Time Quest, which I'm sure certain fans remember. I have a Postman Pat movie in mind because it's also one of my favourite shows of all time. I have a Doctor Who series in production. If you want to see that, check out Brind Who, because I have a few episodes there. And if you like the videos, then yeah, leave me a comment to say that you like it.
The finale of the first series has just been uploaded to YouTube, and production of the second series will begin in January 2016. I think that is probably, you know, in terms of family projects, or in terms of projects George has done, that's the one I'm most proud of. And I think it's, you know, some of the acting sometimes is not perfect, but in terms of, you know, storyline and dramatic kind of intent, it's, you know, it's very good.
Well, he's done several Doctor Who episodes. And we just completed one recently.
Live action, where he plays the Doctor.
And he's also done a bit of stop motion with school. So, you know, he's got lots of interests, and he's been exploring new things. So that is very good.
He always has several projects on the go.
That is what I have got in the future, and who knows, maybe I might do another Bodger and Badger movie. Bodger and Badger 2, eh? So yeah, that is what I'm currently doing at the moment. Things that I would like to do in the future. And I don't think that afterwards I would be doing any more PowerPoint animated films. I would soon have the will to learn using proper computer generated imagery animation to make more of my projects in the future. Although I do have a Thunderbirds movie, which is due for release in 2016, using PowerPoint animation, but more sophisticated with the lip sync, just like the original thing. So that's what I'm working on for the future.
And finally, what are the family's top moments from the film?
My favourite scene in Bodger and Badger the movie has definitely got to be the climactic fight scene. My mum did think that the climactic fight scene was a bit long though, but personally I don't really agree with her. I mean, looking back on that fight scene, I can't see how it's too long. I think there's plenty of slapstick, plenty of little fights and things like that, and mashed potato getting thrown at. I do think though that, I mean, I imagined the exterminator guards to be running to Badger as they were growling, rather than just standing there growling, but PowerPoint animation is very limited, so you know, it would be pretty difficult. But yeah, that's the moment I remember for Bodger and Badger the movie. I watch it every time, and there's no doubt about it. It's a really good scene. Really, really good indeed.
My favourite moment of the film was probably one of the scenes near the beginning that I think really encapsulates kind of classic Bodger and Badger. You know, if I had my way with the production, then, you know, kind of the movie would have been an extended version of kind of this kind of idea. So it's a scene where Bodger and Badger are doing kind of renovation works to Seagull's Rest, and you know, they're trying to clean it up so they can get more visitors. And you know, it's got quite a bit of slapstick comedy, and it's, you know, classic Bodger and Badger. So, you know, that's my favourite moment of the film.
What would you say your favourite scene was?
Well, the fight scene. Although it did go on, I thought there was some quite good special effects. And rotating around, getting dizzy.
Yeah, which I remember was filmed by going to Maine Castle and actually spinning the camera around.
I think it was Mulberry Rings.
Oh, Mulberry Rings, you're right, Mulberry Rings, I remember. Yes, I mean, I thought this fight scene was good as well, although it did end up being rather long. I also thought the sort of more slapstick scenes towards the beginning were really good, like the one where there's some confusion about meanings of words, which results in Bodger getting hit with a hammer.
Hit the head of that bolt. The what? The head. Oh!
Do you remember that scene?
Not very well, no. No.
That! Oh! Ugh. Do you want someone to meet Badger? Mashed potato sandwich? Course work!
And that's the story of the making of Bodger and Badger the movie. Or should I say, the mashing. Goodbye.
Bye!
What a mess!
It's only a trifle messy.
Badger!